Hello everybody. Okay, today I'm taking a look at the Apesoft synth called Stria, and first I'm just going to play around with it for a minute, and then after that I'll give my introduction and get stuck into the tutorial. I've also been playing around with putting a little bit of shockwave in with this. Okay, so that gives you an idea. And now I'm going to turn the volume down a little bit and talk about this. Alright, so this is not a new synth. It's been out for years, and before it was ported to iOS it was available on desktop and stuff. So why do a tutorial on this? Well, when I started trying to read the manual on this and learn how to use it a few days ago, first I found the manual really difficult. Actually, Apesoft make great manuals. They are extremely detailed. I wish that more developers would make manuals like these. But it was difficult because it had a lot of music theory and other things in it that were quite hard for me to understand. And when I went to YouTube and looked around for videos, I was pretty disappointed, to be honest. There was not one single good video that, you know, I felt that, okay, this person has read the manual, they actually understand how to use this, and they're trying to teach people. It was more just playing about with presets and things like that. So I really like the sound of this synth. I think it's beautiful and it's very different, really different. So I kind of thought, you know, I really feel there's potential here. I don't think I understand this, but I'm going to try and have a crack at it. And as I say, I didn't find any good videos, so I thought, all right, you know, I should really make a tutorial video for this. And then as part of that process, I got in touch with Alessandro from Apesoft, and I had to ask him a few questions about things. And one thing that came up was that the guy who created this synth, an Italian, I guess, guy called Eugenio Giordani, actually died recently of COVID-19. And you know, Alessandro and all his friends and family and everything are still grieving for him. And I really felt more determined then to actually make a good tutorial for this. So now there will be some things that I can't explain very well, and I also have time limit. I don't want to make this too long. I'm going to try and keep it to around 20 minutes, but it might go a little bit over. But I think this is a really unique instrument, and it's worth taking a little bit of time. I think that if you watch this tutorial, you'll get a pretty good idea of what's going on with this synth. Because otherwise, I think it's one of those synths that a lot of people would get and take it out, play around with the presets, see the 40-page manual, try and read a little bit, think, hell, this is kind of difficult, and you know, maybe just give it up because they couldn't figure it out. And I think that would really be a massive pity because it's brilliant. Okay, so let's just talk about how it's organized and things like that. So this screen here, this is basically where we can play it. and you can see we have 2 pads, and you can see that they are both on hold mode, so they're sustaining whatever notes are triggered on them. How do we know that? Because pad 1 and pad 2 are both lit up in red, and if I press those, now it's off. That doesn't mean that I can't play, but I need to, if I want the notes to sustain, then I need to press pad until it turns red. So these are the 2 pads. This thing in the middle of the screen, this controls the crossfade between the pads. So when it's over here, we only have the left pad, and when it's over here, we only have the right pad. And then we have the master volume. And the 2 little circles on the top right of this little box, right, so we're talking about this box here. Okay, this is when you're using an instance of Stria as an audio unit, for example, or as inter-app audio, you can assign MIDI to one of the pads. So here you choose, at the moment, if I attached a MIDI keyboard to this in AUM, it would be playing the right pad. But if I press the left circle, then it would play the left pad. Now, of course, if you want to get both playing, well, you can just set up as many instances as you want in AUM. Okay, so that's that. Just close that down. Now, if you look at the top here, we have this little red squiggly thing. That's just the button to select the pads. So on this page, we basically have 2 main kind of pages. This is the pads page, and this is all the parameters for the pads. So let's look at this screen and see how this is organized. We can see there are 3 rows of buttons, basically. So the top row is all the stuff connected to pad 1. I'm going to go through those in a minute. And then we have pad 2 underneath. And you can see that some of the buttons in pad 1 and pad 2 are the same, and some are different. Then the 3rd row, all the stuff along the bottom, these are different post-processing effects. Some of them are pretty crazy, and the last couple are just things like the reverb and compression and stuff like that. Okay, so let's talk about pad 1. So first I'm going to just check the mix here. Right. Okay, so I'm putting it back over to pad 1. Just going to bring the volume up a little bit. It's a bit too much maybe. All right. Okay, so let's look very quickly at what each of these buttons along the top does. So the button beside pad 1, this is called the spectral pitch grid. I'm going to talk more about this in a minute, but it basically organizes the way the pad is. It organizes what notes, what pitches and stuff will be available on the pad. Because this pad is just not like a normal keyboard where, you know, these lines do not represent semitones or anything like that. You can tune this in all different kinds of ways. It's basically microtonal. So you have a lot of different options for how you set things up. So that's what we do in here, in that spectral pitch grid. Like I say, I'll come back to this in a minute. Okay, in here, here we can do things like affect the amplitude of the notes and chords that are playing. You can see these look a little bit like EQ curves, and they're basically controlling the volume of the events, as they're called, which means different notes and chords and things that are produced in the synth. Hang on. I go back here, by the way. I just increase on the top of the screen. We have a slider for maximum polyphony, and it's set fairly low by default. because when this first came out, iPads weren't very powerful, but I think we can handle more. Okay. The fourth button, FM, this is called event parameters. This changes things like the waveform and the rates and duration of the notes. The fifth one, well, you know what, we'll come back to that later. Yeah. Okay, so right now I'm gonna look at, okay, we didn't talk about this one yet. If you look on the very left of the screen, just between pad 1 and pad 2, but slightly to the left, we have the little cogs. Press on that. That is FM setup. And so here you set the ratios between the carrier oscillators and the modulating oscillators. So this is connected to the FM part of the synth. In FM you have the sounds which are produced by an oscillator called the carrier, and then another oscillator modifies those sounds. And so here we're setting the ratio between those. I'm not going to actually mess around with them because it can change the sound quite drastically, and I don't really want to do that right now. It's going to take too much time getting it back the way I want it. Okay, so anyway, that's important. But let's look at this event parameters pad. Okay, so here we can see on the top of the screen we have all the stuff for pad 1, and on the bottom we have all the stuff for pad 2. So right now I'm just going to focus on pad 1. So the first button, we can change the volume. And you can see that that does not have an effect immediately, because if a note is playing, any changes that we make will not affect that note. They will only affect subsequent notes, which allows you actually to change things on the fly without making a complete mess. Okay, so the second button, rate. It's good to play around with rate and duration at the same time. Right, so if we bring down both rate and duration quite low, you can really hear that everything's getting divided into separate little notes. Okay, spread, fourth one. Listen. Now this can get pretty radical, but a small amount can be beautiful. What is this spread? If you look at this diagram here, when we have zero spread, we have, well, maybe one note, depends on how we've set some other things up, but basically the sound is extremely focused. And then if we increase the spread, we get more variety of notes, a thicker sound, and more potential for disharmony. Okay, the FM index button will affect the complexity of the sound. Again, we have to wait for a while to hear it because it won't change the note that's playing right at that moment. You see, this is more complex. The morphs the waveform. Here we have sine. The saw. a lot more brittle, harsher. Okay, so that's the event parameters section. If we look at the third button, this is a very important section. I talked already about the mixture shapes and how these affect the way the amplitude changes over time. Along the bottom, we have components and grid step sliders. Okay, listen what happens when I take components down. So components currently says 6. Let's bring it down to 1. See, now we've basically got one note. I mean, there's some randomization within the note, but pretty much it's one note. Now here we start getting 2. Now, how are these notes being selected? We're going to talk about that next. But you can see there's a lot of potential. I mean, when you're doing a live performance, for example, a lot of what you might want to do would be going between different settings in this components one. You can get some really beautiful harmonies. Okay, the grid step button, not a button, the grid step slider on the right. So you can see at the moment that's set to 1. Just have a listen to what happens when we change it. Listen again to 1. Basically, when grid step has a low value, the 6 notes that we've got, because the component says 6, right? The 6 notes that we've got will basically be very close together in pitch. And as we increase this, they'll start being further apart from each other. Okay, so if we look at the second button, right from the left, this is the spectral pitch grid again. And you can see that at the moment it's set to Fibonacci. Okay, so as I said, generally this does not work like a normal piano keyboard or whatever. It's basically gives you a lot of different options for tuning systems that you can use. So this is really powerful, but you do need to understand a bit about music theory if you want to know how to use it properly and melodically. So this bass note, this determines what will be the note when we play pad 1 on the leftmost side. So if you look up at the red pad 1 button and then you look right from there, you have this little slider thing, right? We talked about, remember this? And then on the right of that, you have 98 hertz, right? Now let me see what happens. Look at the hertz, look at how the number changes as I go up. Okay, so how is this changing? Well, that's what we set up in the spectral pitch grid. So here, the notes will progress in accordance with the Fibonacci sequence. So the Fibonacci sequence is a series of numbers where the first 2 numbers are 0 and 1, and then the next number is the sum of those two numbers. That means the third number will be 1, right? 0 plus 1 is 1. And then the fourth number will be the sum of the two previous numbers. So that means 1 plus 2, right? So the fourth number will be 3. And so then the next number is 2 plus 3, that's 5. So that's the Fibonacci sequence, and that is involved in so much great art and music, right? Through the years, people used these theories, like apparently the Mona Lisa and everything is kind of based on some of these ideas, based on the idea of the golden the golden mean and different ratios that create harmony. So that's how this is structured here. And the offset slider will determine which number in the series this actual series will start from. Okay, I won't go into that in too much detail, just don't have time. Let's look at the first one, geometric. Now you can see here, I mean, I've set these up all starting on a G, right? 98, that's a G, unless I'm remembering wrong. I'm pretty sure it's a G. So as I say, this is microtonal, right? So here we're making it a little bit sharp. It's going to be a slightly sharp G. So I mean, you could also play this, by the way, if you're performing live, right? Now, if you want to get an exact value, you can double click and you can enter your values here. Okay, so geometric. At the bottom we have a slider ratio. This will determine the ratios between the first pitch on the pad and the second pitch that's available for us to play. So as we start going from left to right on the pad, we're going up through successively higher pitches. But what we can do every time in all of these is we're basically determining exactly what those pitches will be. That's very open. So here, if we put a ratio of 2, that will correspond to a shift in octave. So basically the notes will increase. So let's say the first note is G on the second octave, then the second note will be G3, and the next note will be G4, and so on. But we could change this ratio, for example, if we put it as 1.5, then the notes will increase in perfect fifths, which is quite nice. And so not just the notes will increase, also, if you remember, what we're actually playing at the moment is kind of like a chord, because we set the number of components up to 5 or 6 or whatever it is. So the notes that get selected to be played there will all fit in accordance with what we choose in the spectral pitch grid. And again, you can see the hertz at the top. Okay, lovely stuff. All right. So next one, harmonic. Again, I've put the bass as G. Okay, we have the bass slider first, then we have the second slider in harmonic. I'll talk about that in a second. The bottom one, harmonics. Okay, so here I've set harmonics to 40. What this will do is it will create a pitch grid from left to right, where each successive pitch is increasing in terms of the harmonic series, right? So when we have a note, we have the first harmonic, second harmonic, third harmonic, and so on. So that's how this will organize the pitch grid, and we can change the number there. here we'll have 40 different pitches on that pitch grid organized in terms of harmonics, and here we'll have just 20. And then the inharmonic slider, basically if we increase it, the space between the harmonics will become slightly bigger. So it's like a slight detuning effect. And then here they'll become slightly smaller. So this is also really nice to play around with while you're performing. It's like a detune. Okay, Fibonacci we talked about. Scalar. So here we set the minimum pitch that will be played when we play the pad on the leftmost side, and the maximum pitch that will be played when we play on the extreme right of the pad, and then partials. If the number here is 10, that will divide the pad into 10 sections that will be pitches in intervals, like we take the minimum and maximum and divide it into 10 strips basically. Okay, and then tempered. This is based on note values in MIDI. So different MIDI numbers here, like 43, 44, 45, whatever. These correspond to different notes on the keyboard. Okay, so I'm putting it back to harmonic. All right. If we look at the 5th button on the top row, so that's the second from the right. This is called Event Pitch Jittering Pad 1. So here we can kind of warp the pitch. So with small values we can get a kind of detuning effect. If we do this, there will be a lot of random events. Here there will be very few random events. The semitones will determine the possible range of the random events. So obviously if we put both of these really high, we'll get a lot of crazy stuff. If you want less crazy stuff, the main thing is to kind of bring down the delta semitones value lower. Okay. On the right we have the event envelope for pad 1. That's attack and release. Okay, that's very simple to understand. Second row, right, for the pad 2 parameters. If you look, the second button is not a spectral pitch grid, it's this musical scale basically. So at the moment I've got it set to minor harmonic. We can set all different kinds of scales here. So this is the difference between pad 1 and pad 2. Pad 1 we organize in terms of those different 5 options we looked at in spectral grid. Pad 2 is a bit more traditional. We organize it more in terms of actual scales. But the first one, continuum, if we choose that, that will give us complete free range between notes. All right, put it back to minor. Okay. This button, Auto Gen. If you look at pad 2, you can see that the little dot is moving around. So that's what the Auto Gen does. It's kind of like an LFO for the X and Y movements of that trigger on the second pad. Okay, for pad 2, the fourth button is FM. We talked about that already in pad 1. And all the others are the same as well, right? So that's the only thing we need to look at there. And then moving on, we'll look at the last section. I'm going to turn pad 2 off. I don't want to have too much going on. Pad 2 was off already because I had the X fade all the way to the left. Let me just change a few things here. Hang on. I just want to take off that jitter because it'll confuse things. Okay, so these are some effects. The first one on the top left, FX1 Doppler. So at the moment it's off. Now it's on, and you see a little bit of information here. For better results with the Doppler effect, keep the rate low and the duration high under the event parameters pad. Okay, rate low, duration high. Rate, let's put the rate a little bit lower. High duration. Okay. Put the Doppler on. Pretty cool, huh? So what is the Doppler effect? The Doppler effect is the perceived changes in pitch that happen when you pass an object that's making a sound, but you're moving at speed yourself. So let's say, for example, if you're standing by the side of the road and you hear a train coming past, well, that'll sound different from if you yourself are in another train that's actually moving in the opposite direction from that train. So right, you can picture, you listening to this, sort of imagine some kind of sci-fi movie like Minority Report or something, where you have these different cars and some tunnels like moving at great speed, passing each other. Really cool. So that's the Doppler effect. I'll turn it off. I don't want to put too many things on so you can't hear the effects clearly. Okay, on the right, FX2 Stereo Chopper. So this is like a tremolo gating effect. Okay, it's pretty clear. Let's just hear it full on. Okay, a lot of interesting stuff to play with there. I love this synth. It's really cool. All right, bottom left, FX3, Out of Range. This one is a bit tricky to get good sounding effects sometimes. That sounds pretty cool though. I've put it up fully wet. You can hear it's basically creating some noise, weird little random glitches. It's like a glitch generator based on some filters. If you put threshold up too high, particularly because these notes that are playing don't have much amplitude, then if the threshold is too high, you won't get anything happening. So for quiet sounds like this, you need a low threshold before things start to happen. All right. So that's that. FX4, Sync Grain. That was on already, was it? Right, yeah. This is a kind of granular synthesis element. So if the overlap value is higher, the grains will overlap each other more. And here we affect the duration of the grains. And the pitch randomness, as you can imagine, any extreme setting on pitch randomness will be going quite crazy. Even with a duration of 0, it still has an effect. I'm not quite sure why that is. Okay. Here, FX5, spectral arpeggiator. I don't know about you, but I just love anything with spectral in the name. It's so sort of ethereal and evocative. Okay, warning, this effect does not work with buffer size at 128. Let me turn the volume up. What this does is it isolates a part of the spectral a part of the spectrum, a part of the frequency spectrum, and it arpeggiates that while attenuating other frequencies in the spectrum. That's why when the depth is high, it gets very quiet. Because we've suddenly cut out a lot of the frequency range. Nice, nice. Okay, and then here we have the reverb. That's pretty self-explanatory. And then FX7 on the bottom, that's basically compression. I'm not going to go into that. You can read about that in the manual if you want. All right, and that's Stria. I think I've talked about everything, right? Yeah, pretty much. One thing. In the FM setup, if you look at the top right, there are 2 buttons. And it says int. And then if I press the second button, it says float. And you see immediately it's become much less harmonic. That's because when int is pressed, the minimum and maximum values here will actually be kind of rounded up or down to the nearest integer, 1, 2, 3, 4, and so on, whole numbers. But if you select float, then you can have fractions. So this can get really cool frequency glides. Man, what a cool instrument. Well, I've just basically learnt what's happening here, but actually learning how to play this thing, I think, is a whole other kettle of fish. Would take some time to master, but man, I love the sound of it and has some great effects. So, cheers to Eugenio. Beautiful work. Okay, thank you everybody. Again, as usual, if you liked this video, give it a thumbs up. Subscribe if you haven't subscribed. I'm going to be posting more tutorials like this, diving deep into stuff that I love. Alright, thank you. One thing I forgot to say about pad 2 is when we play higher on the y-axis, we get more randomization. When we play right at the bottom, there's no randomization. Okay. Okay, thank you everyone.